Ladies and gentlemen, somewhere in Kericho, boys decided to test Newton's third law of stupidity. Every action has an equal and opposite destruction. Litein Boys High School did not just riot. They upgraded their co-curricular activities to include arson and vandalism. Why? Rumor says it all started because they were not allowed to watch a Premier League match. Which Premier League match? That is Arsenal versus Man City. I think the game was too hot. That match ended with a draw. And yes, in a country where education is expensive and unemployment is free, kids are literally setting fire to their future over football. Man City and Arsenal. Aye, you can't make this up even if you tried. After switching off the lights, these boys, they torched the dormitories, administrative blocks, offices, and classrooms. CCTV and surveillance systems were vandalized to cover their tracks. Some of the Litein boys actually broke into the staff quarters, ransacked the place. Laptops and other valuables belonging to the teachers were reported missing. And then, here is where things get twisty and the demons kick in. Instead of these boys running, they decided it was the perfect opportunity for a midnight cookout. I want you to watch this boy right here. Cooking those eggs in the middle of a riot. Yeah, we've made it. They've denied us such good meals. They enjoy it in the staff quarters. It is our time to eat. And yeah, our time to eat is not only for the government or government officials. It looks, the reflection is mirroring right there in our schools. Anyway, one genius even whipped out his phone and went full influencer mode, recording the destruction like it was content for TikTok. And just when you thought it couldn't get more absurd, another boy jumped behind the wheel of the school bus and started spinning it around the field like he was auditioning for Fast and Furious Kericho Drift. I'm telling you, by morning, the school looked like a disaster zone. And boys had turned a strike into a surreal circus act. I mean, dude, I'm telling you, you cannot make this stuff up. These guys were even riding the school cows. Can you imagine? I think we need to discuss this because I think there's always some certain demon that comes during chaos. Even during protest, guys do the most absurd of things. And even wonder how someone got to the top of a certain building, to the top of a certain street light. It's like, oh, wow, like, dude, you are riding a cow like it's a horse. Anyway, after the rampage, the school was shut down indefinitely, of course. And by sunrise, the compound looked less like a center of learning and more like the set of Black Hawk Down. Within hours, police, who are somewhere sleeping on the job, they stormed in and rounded up 8 to 10 unlucky students, dragged them to court, and the charges: arson, malicious damage, burglary, basically the entire penal code minus treason. Then came in the kicker. Parents were slapped with the bill, and each parent was ordered to cough up a jaw-dropping 137,000 per student. Yes, you heard me right, 137,000 per student. And in a Kenyan classic collective punishment style, nobody was spared. Even the parent of a boy who just yawned, rubbed his eyes, scratched his balls, and went back to sleep, now has to help pay for another kid's midnight omelette session and a Vin Diesel wannabe joyriding the school bus. Now, let's go a bit to the law and what we expect to see. Kenya's penal code does not play games. Light a match where you shouldn't, and suddenly you are staring at a possible life sentence for arson. But the Children's Act barges in with a softer tune. Kids are supposed to be rehabilitated, not warehoused in jail until their grandchildren visit them in black and white zebra-like committee uniform. So the court now has to decide, are these boys just hormonal high schoolers gone rogue, or junior pyromaniacs who mistook the syllabus for Grand Theft Auto? Then there is malicious damage, which drags up to 5 years in prison, and burglary, which can net you 10 years. Bail in such high-profile school unrest cases can swing from 50,000 and cash 200,000. Yes, you can check the law. That is depending on how annoyed the magistrate is that morning, or if he got some coffee. I'm telling you, just to remind parents that parenting is a joint venture with the state. And let's not forget the civil liability twist. Parents being slapped with a bill of 137,000 per child, whether your boy was busy touching the lab or just snoring in the dorm. All right? Collective punishment applies at its finest. It's like judging everyone in a matatu because one passenger farted. Okay, scratch that. Let's shift gears and let's get angry together, because this is not new. It has happened before, more darker than Litein. Let us go to Kyanguli, 2001. It started with student anger. Why were they angry? There were cancelled exam results, a tough new principal, and complaints were piling up. Two boys allegedly bought petrol and plotted revenge. Huyu principal atatuona. He will see what we are made of. That night, they set a dormitory on fire. 67 boys died. 67 boys died. Trapped behind locked windows, we saw families burying their children in mass grief. Two suspects were dragged to court, but the proceedings turned into a circus. The charges never stuck. Evidence was bungled, and after years of adjournment, the case collapsed without a conviction. No one paid for those lives, and thereafter, civil proceedings in 2016, the High Court awarded compensation to bereaved families, holding the school as agent of the state, partly liable for failure to prevent prior arson attempts. So the compensation honestly was so small, it felt like an insult. But leave that one alone. Let's go to St. Kizito, 1991. And this is one of the darkest cases that we have had in Kenyan history. St. Kizito boys went on strike, angry over strict rules with the onset of a new principal. And honestly, I don't know what comes with new principals. Is it that they want to outdo the previous principal, or do they want to look tougher to impress some bosses up there? Or is it maybe just people are just normally resistant to change? I don't know. I don't know what you think. He came in, had stringent disciplinary measures, and the boys were not happy. Some reports say they demanded to have their diet changed to include eggs from the school's poultry farm and milk from the school cows. Some reports also allege that the boys accused the teachers, the male teachers, of dating their girls in school. And if they could not have them, then they said they would do the worst. And that is where we are coming in. This is where it gets even darker. So the boys stormed the girls' dormitory in the dead of the night. And what followed was horror. 71 girls were SA'd, and 19 of them were killed. Let me tell you, the country was shocked for a moment. But justice was shallow. Till today, reports say that 39 boys were arrested. In court, prosecutors fumbled. They couldn't prove motive for murder or directly tie students to that or to those deaths. In fact, even what amazed me the more is a certain picture. I think you can see it on your screens. Those are the boys outside court. And they were happy. In fact, no remorse. They knew what went down. But it's more like it was a celebration. Shame on you, wherever you are. So the charges were watered down to manslaughter and rape. 10 boys were jailed, while the rest walked free. They were reintegrated back to society. Now, this tragedy changed Kenya forever. Mixed boarding schools were abolished. In fact, Moi, the late former president, Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi, was very saddened. In fact, he cried. He went there personally and visited the scene after the destruction, after what had happened to that school. And after that, now we saw policy changes. Mixed schools were abolished, a desperate policy to prevent a repeat of such an incident. But for the victims, the scars never healed. Survivors still carry trauma 3 decades later. Their lives haunted by a night of screams and firelight. And the boys? You know, when the law fails to do what it's supposed to do, then there's a certain woman, some people prefer to call her a bitch, because Kama is a bitch. Kama was not asleep. Or in this case, you can say, Mungu halali. Many of those boys became failures. They were shunned by communities. They became outcasts. Some spiraled into madness. Some spiraled into alcoholism. Others wasted away in poverty and shame, while the rest of the nation simply moved on. Yeah, we moved on. Little to no justice. Manslaughter. Get a few years, 2, 5 years. That's it. Now let's shift gears to a more recent case. Moi Girls Nairobi, 2017. A fire broke out just before dawn, tearing through a dormitory. 10 girls never made it out. Later on, investigations showed it wasn't an accident. It was arson, born out of anger and frustration in the school. Or maybe a certain girl, the arsonist. Complaints of harsh discipline, of course, again, were floating in the air. Congested dorms, unfair treatment by teachers, according to some reports, and simmering resentment that boiled over into violence. Now, a female student, by that time a minor in 2017, some reports say she was aged 14, was charged with 10 counts of murder. But in 2022, the High Court acquitted her of murder, and instead, they charged her with manslaughter. The judge reasoned that there was no proof of intent to kill, what we call the malice aforethought element. So the student may have intended to burn the building, but not necessarily to kill. What? All right, this is where we both slap our foreheads. She was given 5 years for 10 young lives. Imagine that. Parents called it a slap in the face, proof that justice in Kenya comes cheap. But does it? It's debatable. Kenyan public schools have perfected a dark syllabus. Math, English, Swahili, and arson for beginners. The exam isn't written, it's lit. Quite literally. Burn a dome, count the bodies, and then wait to see if the justice system will even blink. At Kyanguli, 67 boys died, and the suspect walked free. At St. Kizito, 19 girls were killed, 71 were SA'd. And most of the culprits melted back into society. Imagine you're a victim and you're watching the perpetrator walking around, drinking in the nearest bar. How are you supposed to live with that? Okay? Survivors lived with trauma for life. At Moi Girls, 10 young girls, we've seen them die. And the punishment was just 5 years. 6 months per child, if you're to do the math. I can only imagine the pain of the parents. Now in court, and this is where I need us to have a conversation. Unfortunately, this is the law. In court, everything boils down to mens rea. What do we mean? The guilty mind. Now, to convict for murder, prosecutors must prove not just there was a fire or a fire was lit, but the intent to kill was there. That's where cases begin to collapse. Judges say, maybe the students meant to burn property. Maybe they were angry. Maybe they wanted to scare the teachers a little bit, to ease down on those rules. But can we prove they wanted death? Without that, murder charges get watered down to manslaughter. Even if 100 children died in their beds. And manslaughter in Kenya often carries shockingly light sentences. Sometimes just a handful of years. You've seen guys being sentenced to 2 years in prison, 5 years, 4 dozen lives lost, or even worse. So here's the question to you, the audience. Should reckless acts that obviously risk mass death still be treated as no intent to kill? Why is this manslaughter punished like a traffic offense when the cost is coffins lined up in school fields? Maybe the tragedy in our schools is just a mirror of the country itself. Bad leaders, broken governance, protests on the streets, met with bullets, bodies left behind. Is it any wonder that children copy the script inside dormitories? Fires in classrooms look a lot like fires in parliaments. Anger with no outlet burns the nearest thing within reach. Look at Kiambu. Schools there have been forced to shut down after a wave of fires and unrest. Administrators have locked the gates, not to teach, but to contain fury before it spreads. And even before that, again still in Kericho, we have Litein Boys High School that have also been hit by the same unrest of Litein Boys and Tengecha Boys. These are current updates that are happening live. I think it's more like a house of cards. Once school starts, the rest of the high schools in the nation, they catch the fever because Litein have sneezed. If the nation cannot protect its own citizens in the streets, can it really protect its children in their beds? So as the smoke clears, yet again, we are left with one but unbearable truth. In Kenya, it's cheaper to bury children than to protect them. And that perhaps is the greatest tragedy of all. See you on the next one.